In the ancient land of Israel, there was a young shepherd boy named David. He was the youngest of 8 brothers and spent his days tending his father's sheep. David was brave and loved God with all his heart. He trusted God and believed that God was always with him no matter what. One day the people of Israel were at war with the Philistines, a mighty and fierce enemy. The 2 armies set up camp on opposite hills with a valley between them. From the Philistine camp came a giant warrior named Goliath. He was over 9 feet tall and wore heavy armor. His spear was as big as a weaver's beam, and his shield bearer walked ahead of him. David was a young shepherd who believed in God. When the giant warrior Goliath challenged the Israelites, David stepped forward with just a sling and a few stones. Trusting in God's help, David struck Goliath in the forehead with a stone, killing him and winning the battle for Israel. His bravery and faith earned him fame. Later, David became the king of Israel after God chose him to replace King Saul. David ruled wisely, expanding the kingdom and bringing prosperity to the nation. His journey from a humble shepherd boy to the revered king of Israel was nothing short of legendary. David's reign was marked by his wisdom, unparalleled courage, and profound faith in God. Under his leadership, the kingdom of Israel experienced unprecedented prosperity and peace. The fields yielded bountiful harvests, the herds multiplied, and the arts flourished. Songs of praise for David's victories and his wise judgments filled the air, spreading his fame far and wide. Yet as with all great men, David was not immune to the pitfalls of pride. As the years passed and his successes mounted, a subtle change began to take root in his heart. The simplicity and humility of his early days were overshadowed by a growing desire to measure his achievements in human terms. It was during this time of prosperity that David made a fateful decision that would bring untold suffering to his beloved nation. Ignoring the warnings of his closest advisors and the quiet whispers of his conscience, David commanded a census of Israel and Judah. The purpose of this census was not for administrative reasons or to improve governance, but to gauge the military might and numerical strength of his nation. This act, seemingly harmless, was a grave transgression in the eyes of the Lord. David's motivation stemmed from pride and a reliance on human power rather than unwavering faith in God's providence. The God of Israel, who had guided and protected his people since the days of Abraham, saw this act of counting the people as a profound betrayal. The Lord's heart was grieved, for David's actions were a clear departure from the trust and reliance that had been the cornerstone of Israel's relationship with God. David's census was not just an administrative error. It symbolized a dangerous shift in trust from the divine to the mortal, from the eternal to the temporal. God's anger was kindled against David and Israel. To convey his displeasure and the seriousness of David's sin, the Lord sent the prophet Gad to deliver a dire message. Gad, a man of deep spiritual insight and unwavering dedication, approached David with a heavy heart. The message he bore was not one of hope, but of impending judgment. David was to choose between 3 devastating punishments: 3 years of famine that would ravage the land, 3 months of relentless defeat before his enemies, or 3 days of a severe plague that would sweep through the nation. David, upon hearing these options, was struck with the weight of his transgression. He realized that his sin had brought his people to the brink of disaster. Overcome with sorrow and fear, he chose to place the fate of Israel in the hands of the Lord, believing that God's mercy, though severe, would be more bearable than falling into the hands of men. Thus a terrible plague was unleashed upon the land, and an angel of the Lord was sent to execute divine judgment. The angel of the Lord, a fearsome and majestic being, descended upon Israel with a sword of fire, shimmering with divine fury. His presence was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. In a single day, 75,000 men perished. The cries of the dying echoed through the valleys and hills, and the once bustling streets were filled with the wails of the bereaved. Homes that had been places of joy and laughter became scenes of mourning and despair. The angel's wrath was unrelenting, a stark manifestation of God's judgment. As the plague swept through the land, the people of Israel were gripped with fear and sorrow. They saw their neighbors, friends, and family members fall victim to the angel's sword. The thriving cities, once symbols of Israel's strength and prosperity, were now shrouded in a pall of death. The air was thick with the scent of destruction and the cries of the afflicted. The people were reminded of their own mortality and the frailty of human power. The angel's path of destruction brought him ever closer to the heart of Israel, the holy city of Jerusalem. As he stood poised to strike the city, God, in his infinite mercy, saw the suffering of his people and was moved. Though his justice demanded retribution for their sins, his compassion sought to temper the punishment. At the threshing floor of Arana, the Jebusite, a place of humility and hard work, the angel halted, his sword still raised, awaiting the command of the Lord. In this moment of divine intervention, God spoke to the angel, commanding him to cease the destruction. The angel sheathed his sword, and the immediate threat to Jerusalem was averted. David, witnessing the angel and the devastation wrought upon his people, was overcome with profound grief and remorse. Clothed in sackcloth, a symbol of mourning and repentance, he fell to his knees and poured out his heart in prayer, pleading for mercy. He confessed his sin openly, taking full responsibility for the calamity that had befallen Israel. God, in his mercy, instructed David through the prophet Gad to build an altar on the threshing floor of Arana. This place, once used for the mundane task of threshing grain, would become a sacred site of atonement and worship. David obeyed without hesitation. So David went up to do what the Lord had commanded him through God. He approached Arana the Jebusite. Arana, who was busy threshing wheat at the time, turned and saw the angel there. His 4 sons who were with him ran away and hid. When Arana saw David approaching, he left his threshing floor and bowed before David with his face to the ground. David purchased the land, insisting on paying the full price, for he would not offer to the Lord that which cost him nothing. David built an altar there to the Lord and sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings. And when David prayed, the Lord answered him by sending fire from heaven to burn up the offering on the altar. Then the Lord spoke to the angel, who put the sword back into its sheath. When David saw that the Lord had answered his prayer, he offered sacrifices there at Arana's threshing floor. At that time, the tabernacle of the Lord and the altar of burnt offering that Moses had made in the wilderness were located at the place of worship in Gibeon. But David was not able to go there to inquire of God, because he was terrified by the drawn sword of the angel of the Lord, as seen in the book of 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 18 to 21, and verses 26 to 30. On this sacred ground, where David built an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, the smoke of the sacrifices rose to the heavens, a symbol of repentance and a plea for divine favor. David's actions were not just ritualistic. They were a heartfelt expression of his deep sorrow and his desire to restore his relationship with God. The Lord accepted the sacrifices, and the plague was halted. Peace returned to the land, and the people of Israel saw their king humbling himself before God, leading them by example in sincere repentance. The story of the angel's wrath and the subsequent mercy of God became a poignant reminder to the people of Israel about the importance of humility and trust in God's power. It underscored the perils of pride and the consequences of relying on human strength rather than divine providence. The people learned that even their greatest king was not above the need for repentance, and that God's justice, though severe, was tempered with profound mercy. King David's experience became a timeless lesson in the balance of justice and mercy. It highlighted the significance of true repentance and the enduring love of God for his people. Instead, he focused on restoring his faith and leading his people with a renewed sense of humility and devotion to God. David's writings during this period, particularly the Psalms, reflected his inner transformation. They spoke of the Lord's unfathomable mercy, his just nature, and the profound need for repentance and humility. David's court, too, felt the impact of this transformation. His advisors, having witnessed the consequences of pride and the power of sincere repentance, became staunch advocates for humility and faith. Policies and decisions were now made with a keen awareness of the need for God's guidance. The kingdom of Israel, under David's renewed leadership, once again found favor in the eyes of the Lord. The story of David's sin, the angel's wrath, and God's mercy was passed down through generations. It became an integral part of Israel's spiritual heritage, a story recounted to children and elders alike. It served as a powerful reminder of the dangers of pride and the importance of maintaining faith in God. The lessons learned from this episode were woven into the fabric of Israel's identity. In the years that followed, Israel faced many challenges, but the memory of David's repentance and God's mercy provided a foundation of hope and resilience. The people knew that their strength lay not in their numbers or their military might, but in their relationship with the Almighty. They understood that sincere repentance and a humble heart could restore even the gravest situations. As David grew older, his thoughts turned to the future of Israel and the legacy he would leave behind. He devoted his remaining years to ensuring that his son Solomon would inherit a kingdom rooted in faith and humility. David imparted to Solomon the wisdom he had gained through his experiences, emphasizing the importance of trusting in God above the story of David's journey from shepherd boy to king. His triumphs and failures teaches us important lessons. It shows that with faith in God, we can overcome any giant in our lives. It also reminds us of the dangers of pride and the importance of humility and repentance. David's life is a testament to God's unfailing love and mercy. Even when we make mistakes, God is always ready to forgive us if we turn back to Him with sincere hearts. David's story inspires us to trust in God's strength, seek His guidance, and live with integrity and faith. Through the highs and lows of David's life, we see a man who, despite his flaws, was deeply loved by God. His legacy is one of courage, faith, and a heart that continually sought after God.